The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
The field of 16 is set, Chris Johnston. We now know who will play who in this year's Stanley Cup playoffs. Do you feel the excitement?
I do. I mean, I must say, Julian, watching the slate of games the last few nights is, the matchups were getting locked in. Montreal and Columbus slugging it out right until the second last day of this regular season before the Canadiens booked their spot back in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I mean, I do think you feel the anticipation going up, the excitement, the enthusiasm. You hear it in the players' voices. This was a funny end of the season. I suspect we won't spend a lot of time looking backwards because what's in front of us is so glorious. But, one sort of observation I'll make is there was kind of more meaningless games. It felt like more teams resting players. I don't blame the teams. It's not a commentary on that as much as just an observation that, frankly, too, we have a lot of injured, star level players or difference making type of players around the league that I'm sure will be a big part of what we talk about as we go through the series, because there's so many big names, that are maybe going to play at less than 100%, or maybe not going to play game one, or maybe not going to play at all in round one. I mean, there's a range of what's going on here. And so you can understand why those teams, when they're already booked, have chosen a little bit more of the load management bubble wrap kind of idea. But, it led to some funny lineups down the stretch. And so I guess what I'm excited about is a long way of saying you feel the excitement going up, but we haven't seen the games at the level that we're going to see right away starting Saturday. I mean, that's always what I love and kind of almost marvel at a little bit, is how the only thing that changes is that, all of a sudden now nobody's being paid, right? And they're literally playing for the start of trying to win 16 games to win the Stanley Cup. And the level of buy-in, the level of sacrificing body, even maybe role on the team, like just doing whatever is asked of players. Like it gets to such a higher level, and it's so obvious. And even if you're not an expert on a sport or anything like that, I just think if you watched one of those games, if you watched Saturday and you saw a game, this past week, it's just not quite the same thing. And so, I mean, man, that's right at hand, brother. Like that's right in front of us now. And it's exciting that we're going to be here for what's sort of really a marathon. Whichever two teams go to the end of this thing will be beaten, bruised, and emotionally just drained once they get to mid to late June. But everyone's fresh right now and ready to go.
If you had to order all 8 playoff series from most intriguing to least intriguing, how would you do it?
Ooh. I've taken a bit of a swing at this. I think for me, Carolina, New Jersey might be least intriguing. Mm-hmm. And keep in mind, all of this is a scale. Like there's generally is not bad playoff series. So that's not what I'm saying here. It's just more, I feel like with, Hughes not being in that series, obviously the Devils kind of sputtered a bit down the stretch. So they got Dougie Hamilton back right just before the playoffs here. But I just feel like Carolina is likely to make quick work of that series. And so, that one doesn't have maybe as a compelling storyline as we can build around some of the others. And I just don't expect it to be that close. And so that's probably, the one I'd say is at the bottom end. I mean, the most intriguing, Dallas, Colorado for me. I mean, I think you're overthinking it if you're not saying that, just because it's two teams that most people do believe if things went their way this spring, injuries are on their side. Unfortunately for the Stars, that isn't the case as we're recording this, but that can change too. Both those teams could be Stanley Cup winners, and the fact they play in round one, you've got these sort of interpersonal drama, we'll call it, with Mikko Rantanen in that series. You've got two of the absolute best players on earth, in Makar and McKinnon. Teams that played last year played a pretty good series in the playoffs, so there's some history there. I think the stakes are pretty high for both franchises, and one of them that loses will, I'm not saying they're going to make a bunch of rash decisions, but it's at least possible that they might have to consider a different course when it comes to building out, what they're doing. So that's probably at the top end, and then we got a cascade from there.
Yeah. We should try to run through each of these playoff series. We don't have to spend like 30 minutes on each of them, but it'd be cool to try to just touch off on some of them. We kind of started already with Carolina, New Jersey. I do wish that we would have the presence of a Jack Hughes for this series. I also do think Carolina could end up winning this series in about 6 games. I'd like to see New Jersey put up a fight. I'm happy that they're going to get Dougie Hamilton back. I'd like to see what Jacob Markstrom can do in a series like this, where obviously in a new team, just getting behind that new system in New Jersey. But I see the Carolina Hurricanes with the way that they've been built. This is a team that expects to go on another big run. I see them as the favorite in this series.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm not doing picks, at least not formally. I have no plans to for the playoffs. But if I was doing a pick for the series, I might consider a sweep, honestly. For Carolina. And, if I was being maybe a little bit hedging my bet, I'd go to Carolina in 5. But I just have a hard time talking myself into New Jersey making this close. And look, I will be the first to put my hand up. If you followed my picks over the years closely, I make a whole bunch of bad ones. And so this is just the feeling at the outset. But I do think that, the Hurricanes have played super. Like they've just been a really good team, and they've been a really good team for a long time, and they have experience in these moments. And yes, they don't necessarily have sort of the game breaker superstar in their lineup. And at times in the playoffs in previous years, that's kind of cost them. The scoring dries up and they have trouble generating in that environment. I don't know that that's going to be a major issue for them in this particular matchup. So, I just see this being pretty one-sided in Carolina's favor. And that's where, that's why it starts off maybe at the bottom of my intrigue meter. And, the beauty about that is maybe New Jersey wins the first 2 games, and all of a sudden, if I had to reorder the intrigue meter by Thursday, my intrigue might be up on that because, something would be happening I wasn't anticipating. I mean, that's, the first round in particular, I feel like you can see there can just be some swings either way. As it goes along, usually, injuries and things start to play into as it goes along. But I just feel like there's a little more unpredictability in the first round. And so maybe I'm sleeping on the Devils a little bit, but just everything tells me, everything I've looked at, everyone I've talked to about the sort of the best teams in the league, the contenders, putting out a contender tier with Harman Dial, in which we basically poll people around the league and come up with a 1 to 16 ranking of the contenders. Nobody, I can tell you, we're not totally finished the polling yet, but nobody has the Devils too high. And Carolina, at least on a few lists, is right near the top. So, I just feel like they're going to have enough to get through this round without giving a pound of flesh to do so.
Okay, I know you have your list of least intriguing to most intriguing. I was going to originally follow that, but we've gone a couple minutes into this podcast and we have not mentioned the most exciting series in the Eastern Conference. The series that's going to have both of us on opposite sides, and we're both actively working on stories on it as it is. I don't care. We should get to this as quickly as we can here. The Battle of Ontario. It's a thing. For the first time in 21 years, we will see the Leafs against the Sens. I'm all in on this series. I'm all in on this drama. I can't wait for this.
Yeah, it's because it's a series that comes. I think the on ice part is intriguing. You have a team that hasn't made the playoffs since 2017, like the Senators, kind of all young and new and exciting, especially for fans that have endured a lot of crap in the 8 years between that last appearance and this one. And then you have the Leafs, of course. We don't need to highlight what's going on for them. Ironically, their start of their playoff run wasn't that 2017 playoffs. Lost to Washington that year, and they've lost 7 of the 8 series they've played since, but they've been in the dance every season. They've played 5 game sevens. They've certainly flirted with success and not been able to grab it. And so you have that aspect, and you have the regional part. And then I just think everything around it will be a little different. Again, every series has its dynamics, but I feel like the fan aspect, the rivalry part, the fact that I do expect for sure a lot of blue and white sweaters. I know the Senators are doing everything they can to keep that from being a fact. But the games that are played at Canadian Tire Center, there's going to be Sens fans also at Scotiabank Arena. So I just think like that, all of that flavor is going to add some spice to it. And then of course, those old enough are viewing this through nostalgia too. There's a lens of, what the fact they played those 4 rounds in 5 years previously. I think a lot of people that are around my age, maybe a little younger and certainly older, remember those series. It was quite a strange occurrence at that time. That was still when you had the 1-8 conference format, Julian. So the fact that they played 4 times in 5 years was a bit of an anomaly, especially I believe 3 of those were in the first round. There was 2002, they met in the second round. Mm-hmm. But the point is the fact they lined up all those years was kind of weird. It felt strange to see teams play that often. And so anyway, it's a long way of, I'm with you. It's there's a lot to this, I guess, is what I'm saying. And I think fans have been hoping for this in both cities. Clearly, I mean, you've had even Michael Andlauer, the Sens owner, I saw the story he wrote at The Athletic. We spoke to some of the reporters there. He wanted this. The players have wanted this. I mean, what's not to like when everybody is kind of all in on it? I just think that the buy-in's always going to be huge, but I just think the stakes are pretty high right now because, the Sens clearly want to be spoilers. I mean, that's the only way to look at this. And the Leafs have a lot of pressure on their shoulders if they start to get things spoiled by Ottawa. And so you just have that dynamic there too. So I think, man, like whatever part of the tree you're grabbing an apple off of, you know what I'm saying? Like you have all these different options, but what makes this interesting, they all are going to be sweet and nice and interesting and delicious.
Just made me hungry all of a sudden. Okay, with the Leafs, we know about the demons. They exist. What's a big storyline and key you'll be looking out for on the Toronto side of things?
I mean, there's a few. One of the things I think that's been different about the Leafs this year than some of their previous years, they've really had outstanding goaltending throughout the season. If you look on balance of 80, well, they played 81 as of now, but as of 82 on Thursday night, they've consistently been among the best in the league when it comes to goals saved above expected, team save percentage. And so, what's interesting about that is that it was done by 2 goaltenders who neither of them previously has ever truly been a number 1 in the NHL. Anthony Stolarz, I would expect, will be Toronto's goalie of record. He's had a really strong finish to the regular season, and will probably carry the mail going into the playoffs. But I mean, what does that change? Does anything change? Like in theory, it shouldn't, right? It's been spectacular all season long, but you get in that environment. There's going to be a lot on his shoulders because if you look at the way the Leafs play under Craig Berube, and I know there's already been some discussion about this, but they give up shots. They're not a team that generates generally more shot attempts than their opposition at least on a consistent basis over time. And that puts a certain amount of pressure on the goaltender. Now, one thing the Leafs have done better at, I think, this season is, generally speaking, they take care of the high danger area reasonably well. When things, when you've seen them have this run of success, they're playing in a lot of lower scoring games and not giving up maybe the high grade ones, but goaltender still has to save shots. And so when I think of something that could shake the foundation of the team, it would be if for the first time this year they faced a real sort of like, oh man, the goalie's like truly shaky. I mean, again, over any season, your goalie's going to have the odd off night, but it just was never really a story for the Leafs this year. Over any meaningful amount of time, if it was a bad game, maybe it becomes 2, but then by the third game, he wins, and then it never became sort of something they had to push back against. And so that will be interesting, just like how the whole goaltending thing goes. And then the other part is I'm bearing the lead here. Can the Leafs power play do anything? Once again, good regular season power play was very good, really, since they went to the 5 forward format formation for the last half of the season. They had a nice conversion percentage, but the one thing that has consistently evaded the Leafs when they've had trouble in the playoffs is scoring goals and specifically cashing in with the man advantage. So I think that that puts the spotlight back on the obvious players, the guys who led them in scoring this year: Mitch Marner, William Nylander, Austin Matthews in particular. John Tavares had a fantastic year. He's obviously expected to produce offense as well, but particularly the 3 guys I mentioned off the top. Are they getting points? Are they getting chances? Are they getting frustrated if those things aren't coming? Because we know this much: they will be under the microscope even after 2 games if the offense doesn't look right, if they get some power play opportunities and don't convert, I mean, the Heat will start it's already, the oven is at about 350 right now, and it can quickly go up to 450, 500 within a days of us recording this. Like it can turn that quickly. And so I think offensively, I'm just curious where those guys' minds are at, how they're performing, how the power play is clicking, and then the goaltending.
For me, you mentioned the power play. On paper, I give the Leafs that edge, not just off the fact that they have the personnel, and I've seen that power play click and work and literally win games for this team. I'm still not completely sold on that Sens PK. I don't have the stat exactly in front of me, but just in the formation, the diamond formation that they have, where they can be susceptible to guys playing well on the goal line. If the Leafs are able to exploit that, I think they have a legit chance at it. But I know the Sens have had some success in recent games with that PK. And I think the fact that they can commit to a defensive style, I'm very intrigued about how that plays against that Leafs team. I'm very intrigued about the matchup that goes up against an Austin Matthews. We've seen Shane Pinto's line with Ridley Gregg go up against Austin Matthews, and Shane Pinto has had success going up against Austin Matthews. Let's see how that plays out in a postseason series. What matchups does Tim Stützle get? This is a guy who's worked at being a 200-foot player throughout this season, and his defensive metrics have actually improved from now compared to his previous seasons. What matchups does he get against this Leafs team? I just think, we're pretty much delving into a preview of this series here, but so many different storylines I'm looking at on the Sens side, obviously. And you mentioned goaltending with Anthony Stolarz in Toronto. Linus Ullmark enters a series where he doesn't have to worry about sharing any net with any tandem partner or anything like that. I know at the end of last year, he was saying, hey, it'd be nice to stay in Boston. It'd be nice to continue the revenge tour. The revenge tour continues in Ottawa. Let's see how that plays out. I think, if anything, he's the most important player for this Sens team. And yes, it's very easy to pick the goalie to do that, but goaltending has been a very big Achilles heel for this Sens organization over the last 8 years when they were out of the playoffs. Of course, he has to be the guy in a postseason series.
Well, and I'll say this, to look at it through a Leafs angle, the one series that they've won during this run was 2023 against Tampa. Andrei Vasilevsky was not very good, certainly by his standards in that series. And they kind of punctured him. And I think in the process, punctured any sort of idea that it wasn't going to go their way, right? Because, in this time, I mean, if you look at the Leafs playoff losses, they've played some pretty good goalies, and I'm certainly not making excuses for their series of losses, but even the Montreal loss, I was still Carey Price at playing at a high level. Obviously they faced the Bruins. Jeremy Swayman was primarily the one in net last year. Ullmark did get one start in that series, but they've come up against goaltenders who I think have frustrated them in conjunction with, the team, the environment the team was creating around them and not giving the Leafs a lot. But, I think Ullmark, is he able to sort of get in their minds a little bit? And again, it's not just about him. I think it's about the context that every year they seem to get to the playoffs other than the one time. And the goaltender spectacular. I mean, actually, Sergei Bobrovsky, even when they got to round 2 in 2023, was spectacular in that series. That was kind of the beginning, that period of Bobrovsky's rebirth, I'd say, where he went from, people were saying, like, how could you ever get rid of this contract it's bogging down Florida's cap sheet, to, he's one of the main reasons they were able to win a Stanley Cup and get to another. So, I think Ullmark looms sort of large in that he can feed off of he can maybe raise some of those demons, if we want to call them, or some of the doubts that might be there for the guys that are frankly paid to score and haven't always been able to get the job done come the playoff time. The one thing I'll mention too about your matchup, conversation, which I actually think will be very interesting, because first of all, we'll see, in a playoff game, does Craig Berube chase to get Matthews away from a certain matchup, or is he thinking this is our alpha? I don't know how Craig Berube as the Leafs coach will react to that, but the Leafs in the last month or two have really built a second line that's had a lot of success. It's been, William Nylander and John Tavares primarily, and then they've had sort of a rotating cascade of wingers on the left side. It ended the season with Max Domi. Bobby McMahon had a pretty good run there prior to that. We've seen Kelly Yarncroc. Anyway, I don't know I don't know exactly. I mean, look, Max Pacioretty might come into this series. From the Leafs perspective, he hasn't played in a long, long time, since before the Four Nations break. But if he does, I actually think he would be a candidate to go in that second left wing spot, just because of, he's a goal scorer. He's someone that you would probably want to be giving offensive looks to if you were going to play him in a game. But, the Leafs can maybe, I'm sure in their mind, when they're in their coach's room, they're thinking about how they can have that line at least make some decisions a little less comfortable, whether it's deep pairings that the Sens are targeting, or what they're doing with, the Pinto line or what have you. So, I mean, that's the thing I always think, and this is an evergreen statement about every series, but yes, you've seen the teams play in the regular season, but I don't think the matchup game for most regular season games is anywhere near certainly what you see now, where, these coaching staffs, I mean, Craig Berube, I actually asked him a question about sort of the Leafs preparations a week ago, and he was saying they were already diving deep, on the coaching end of the potential, matchups. I'm sure it's the same on the Senators side. So there's a different level of precision, I would say, applied to how these decisions are made. And then obviously you see what happens in game one and you're reacting, and then you move to game three and Ottawa gets last change, and all those things go on from there.
One more thing before we move on to another series. We can't discuss the Battle of Ontario and not discuss Brady Tkachuk. This will be his first time entering the postseason. He's played over 500 something games. He's craved meaningful games basically all his life. The Four Nations quenches that appetite, but he wants more. But he also hasn't played since the end of March. By the time you guys get this podcast, it remains to be seen if he'll play in that final regular season game against Carolina for the Ottawa Senators. There's a world where he returns from injury game one of that playoff series. I expect him to be a factor. I expect him to be that guy. I think as he goes, so does this team. And I expect him to play with emotion. I expect him to play with just reckless abandon. And I've heard it from so many people around the team who expect him to be unleashed in this postseason run. What do you think about how Brady Tkachuk will play?
Well, I would call him the X factor, because, and being the X factor, it can work both ways, right? Like when I hear what you're saying, I agree with it. But I wonder, does some of that emotion go too far in the wrong way? Does he take a penalty, right? That's something, that line is what the players that do what Brady Tkachuk do are always searching for. I think back to, prime Nazem Kadri in Toronto, unfortunately crossed that line a few times and got suspended in the playoffs. But obviously what made his game so good was being an agitator, finishing checks, not shying away from anything, sort of setting a tone. Certainly, Brady Tkachuk is going to look to do that. But, first of all, I'm wondering what you are. Will his body allow him to do that? I mean, I can't say I know where he's at. It's just we've seen him miss, a couple games right after the Four Nations, and then this batch right now, since the end of March. Maybe that's fine. Maybe we'll look back and be like, that rest was the perfect thing for him. He came out unleashed, or maybe he just won't quite have his timing. Maybe it hasn't been enough for him. I mean, so I think that's fascinating to watch, because his heart and his mind will be there, but will his body follow suit and allow him to do that? And then the second part is just because it's his first time too in the Stanley Cup playoffs. I know played a ton of games. He did play at the Four Nations. He wears the C proudly, all those things, but it's a different environment, and you got to be really mindful of getting the toe on the line without crossing it, because small margins decide games in the playoffs, and so I think you're right to bring him up, because everybody in the series on both sides, and this is a compliment to him, will be watching him in a sense. Like, you're just wondering, what's he going to do? Is he going to try to fight somebody? But even more than that, is he going to become a distraction? Are the Leafs going to end up chasing him around the ice half the time? I don't know how that's going to go. And that's why it's sort of interesting. And the fact he hasn't played too just adds another element, because sometimes you may want to do something, but if whatever, if his skating isn't there, if he's a step off, he could be someone the Leafs exploit too. These things cut both ways, and that's what makes him such a compelling force in this series.
Had an upper body injury a couple days ago against Pittsburgh. That's why he hasn't played. Tweaked his hip a couple weeks earlier. I think that's what happened to him at the Four Nations, and then I think again something happened. But just he's been battling injuries, particularly through the second half of the year. And the Sens now are giving him this load management thing. And look, I still think he'll come out with some force in the playoffs, but he becomes, I think, the biggest storyline just because of the importance to the Sens, but also the stardom that's grown around him since the Four Nations, what he's been able to do at that tournament, how he's been able to talk about the game of hockey since. Like, obviously for us in Canada, we're going to focus on the Battle of Ontario and what it means for both of these teams to be involved. If you have a vested interest and you're not in Canada, if you're watching on ESPN or TNT or whatever broadcaster is there, Brady Tkachuk is an easy entry point for you for this Battle of Ontario series if you care to watch it. Like, I think he's this big factor you have to pay attention to, whether you're playing up against him or you're in the crowd watching.
Yeah, and let's not forget, like, the last number of years, what's he been doing? Every year in the playoffs, he's in the crowd watching his brother Matthew go on those playoff runs and drinking beers with the fans and doing all that stuff. But I mean, he's soaked in that atmosphere more than most NHLers who haven't actually played a Stanley Cup playoff game, because he was literally on the world tour, it felt like, the last years, even back to Matthew Tkachuk's time in Calgary, and then obviously the 2 runs he's had in Florida. And so, he's particularly itching for it. When he's watching those Florida games, Julian, what's he seeing? He's seeing the likes of Sam Bennett out there. He's seeing his own brother, like the sorts of things that they do in series. I mean, think of the Panthers of the last couple of years. You had the Bennett-Brad Marchand thing last year in the playoffs. I mean, there's let's face it, there's an underbelly to the playoffs too, right? It's far less about skill and all those things. And it becomes a little bit more about will and battle and what leads us to be called the Battle of Ontario to begin with, right? Because those were such spirited, emotional games when these teams met a long time ago. Again, different style of the NHL, but Brady Tkachuk is someone that could have played in the original Battle of Ontario. The way he's built, the way he approaches the game. Let's face it, he's his father's son. I mean, Keith Tkachuk did play in that era. He wasn't on those teams, but the larger point remains. I just think, he is just uniquely positioned 500 odd games into his career, having gone to all these games, like, the first game in particular will be fascinating on Sunday, just to watch him, the first few shifts, because he's going to have all the emotion in his legs, all the energy, and then what the Leafs do. I mean, how they approach that will be fascinating. Is it a turn the other cheek? Is it, try to have someone, not necessarily just fight him, but go out of his way to finish checks? Like, I don't know what the best approach is there, and we're gonna find out.
We are absolutely going to find out, and I cannot wait. We could have done an entire episode trying to break down Toronto-Ottawa, but there are other series to get to, like Washington versus Montreal. The Canadiens winning over the Carolina Hurricanes on Wednesday night. That gets them into the postseason for the first time since 2021, and for the first time since 2010, we get Washington-Montreal in the first round.
Yeah, and everyone's trying to summon the ghosts of that, I feel like, because that was a pretty notable series, because the Canadiens team not expected to, rode some great goaltending with, we believe it was Yaroslav Halak in that series on Montreal side, and found a way to win it in 7 games. And that was the early days of the Capitals heartbreak, right? That was when they were repeatedly a top team in the league and not having a whole lot of success come the postseason, and that kind of crystallized it or reinforced it. I'm having a harder time, as much as I tip my cap to the Canadiens for finding a way to get in the playoffs. And as much as I really, you'd have to be sleeping under a rock to not notice the Ivan Demidov, debut, scoring on all that stuff. Like, I think lots of exciting things are happening with this team, but I have a hard time talking myself into them truly making this an upset situation. I don't think they're going to be laughed out of the rink, but I think there's a few too many holes there. They're entering the playoffs with a pretty significant goal differential in the negative, which typically isn't a good sign. I just think their blue line needs some maturing. I mean, you like the pieces, but David Savard is getting to the end of his days, and Lane Hudson maybe isn't. To me, there's still. This is a great step. I mean, this is awesome. And I think everybody should be excited to see Stanley Cup playoff hockey, even if you're just tuning in to watch the anthem or watch the start of the game. When it gets to game 3 of that series, return to the Bell Center after so long, since fans have been in a playoff game there. or full fans anyway, full arena. But it feels like they're on borrowed money now, and maybe that could be something they harness, because the Capitals certainly have some of their own injuries that they've been navigating. But doesn't seem like a series to me. I'm not going in there thinking Montreal is going to truly mount a serious upset thing. What are you looking at there?
It's interesting because I've heard a few people suggest otherwise. I've heard a few people say that maybe on the Washington side that they're still not completely convinced that they might be the team to make a run. And I've heard people say maybe their underlyings haven't necessarily been the best. And even their last few games, their last 10 or 11 so games, they have not been sharp as well. So maybe that could bode negatively for the Washington Capitals. But I also think with the Canadiens too, yeah, sure, there's definitely some holes. I think it's more just inexperience for me. I think just looking at them, but they definitely have a ton of talent. I also think with the way that Nick Suzuki has come along in this season, that's going to help them go a long way. I mean, some inexperience in some parts, but like Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, some of those guys have been on that 2021 Cup final team. So they have some experience, albeit not in the format of the playoffs, at least that we know, with all the fans and all that. But still, like that still counts for something for that team. I don't know. I think the Caps might still win this series anyway. I still think their big guns should be able to get a win I would say in 6. I'm not trying to get into too many predictions for this segment, but I think it could lean towards that. But I think this could be a really cool experience for the Canadiens and Martin St. Louis and that group that gets itself out of a rebuild and finds itself in a position where they could say they've made the playoffs with this group. And now it's on them to try to make it more of a recurring thing. But for Washington, the way that they're built, the goaltending they've had throughout the year, we know what Alexander Ovechkin's meant to that team, what guys like Pierre-Luc Dubois have been able to do on that squad, Ryan Strome. I think that
Alexi
Protas as well. Also, I said Ryan Strome, Dylan Strome. I think for the Caps, and Spencer Carberry, I think he's going to win Jack Adams as well. I like this Caps team. I don't know if they're the team to come out of the East, but they should at least get out of the first round.
That's my thought. I called the X factor in the Battle of Ontario. For me, it would be Suzuki in this series, just because this is clearly his best NHL season, most impactful. He was the most important player, especially down the stretch for the Canadiens. I mean, they barely led. If you look at the last month, they were trailing after the first period almost every game. But, they found ways to get wins. They had the comebacks. Obviously, he scored some big goals in that point in time. Even scored a goal against Carolina on the night that they officially finally wrapped things up. But, can Suzuki elevate? Can he drag his teammates in? Can he, we've seen it's not that one player ever wins you a series, but one player can get you a long way there if he's impactful enough. Maybe Suzuki's able to take over in a manner that maybe that some people might be sleeping on, including me. And so I'm truly curious to see, how he looks. Like, I know he played when they got in the playoffs in the COVID years, but that was, first of all, those games didn't involve fans. I'm moving past them. I'm almost not counting them. They count in the history books. I'm not disputing that, but I'm just saying this is a different thing. And obviously he was a young player then. Now he's the captain of the team. And, he's the first line center. Like, when we get to the offseason, what are we going to be talking about? The Canadiens need a second line center. Like, they need to support Nick Suzuki. When I watched that game against the Leafs last weekend, Suzuki did totally fine in his minutes. Obviously he was playing against some tough competition, most shifts. The Leafs then come to that second line I was talking about. They get the Tavares and Nylanders out. And Montreal just didn't, in my eyes, have enough to kind of handle that consistently over the game. And, it's a clear hole in their lineup, big picture. Again, I think that they have the cap space to do it. They have the will to do it. But the point of raising this now is to say that he has to shoulder such a big load because they don't really have a true number 2 center at this point in time behind him. So it's almost like he has to be a 1+ to get through a series. But look, I think he's going to play a ton of minutes. And he's shown down the stretch, I think in particular, that he can do it. So if I'm going to try to slowly build the case here with my Lego bricks of how this could look, maybe it's built around, Nick Suzuki, being a force in that series, being someone that Washington's got to spend a lot of time trying to shut down and not being able to. I mean, otherwise I think it's going to be hard for the Canadiens to do it. But at the same time, let's also not rain the expectations on them, because that's coming. We have enough examples around the league. Like, that will come where soon, eventually, it's like every year, unless you're a true contender, they're going to be taking heat. They're not quite in that window just yet.
Absolutely. If of all the players on the Montreal Canadiens, Nick Suzuki, if I were a fan, he'd be the player I'd worry about the least, considering what he's been able to do in the past and what he's able to do on the offensive and the defensive side. This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Mando. You ever lift a little too hard or just forget to apply your daily deodorant and you get hit by a truckload of BO from all directions? Does your 3-in-1 shampoo leave you needing a second shower just a few hours after the first? From the founders of Lumi, Mando Whole Body Deodorant is helping men conquer their odor in a new way. Formulated with mandelic acid, Mando has long-lasting 72-hour odor control that actually stops odor before it starts. Best part is, you can use Mando anywhere. Pits, packages, feet, skin folds, back, knees. I'm telling you, everywhere. To top it off, Mando's cologne quality scents were created with men in mind. Pro tip, try their best-selling bourbon leather. It's a game changer. Once you experience fresher underarms, a fresher package, and fresher feet, you will never go back. New customers get $5 off a starter pack with our exclusive code and link. All you have to do is use the code Johnston at shopmando.com. That's shopmando.com. Shopmando.com, and just use the code Johnston. The starter pack, if you're interested, perfect for new customers, comes with a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, 2 free products of your choice like the mini body wash and deodorant wipes, and free shipping. As a special offer for our viewers and listeners, new customers get $5 off a starter pack with our exclusive code. That equates to over 40% off your starter pack. Just use the code Johnston at shopmando.com. Again, shopmando.com. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Smell fresher, stay drier, and boost your confidence from head to toe with Mando. Okay, the Battle of Florida. I almost feel like it's like you think of Dallas, Colorado as like the series to watch. Toronto, Ottawa, that's a series obviously we're both going to be paying attention to. I feel like the Battle of Florida is in a little bit of like a sleeper like role where like I think that could be a pretty good series too, but that might also depend on how healthy Florida is. And I also think Tampa's been really good for the last little while, but also this year, Andrei Vasilevsky's back. Their goal differential's among the best in the league. Nikita Kucherov is having an MVP caliber season. I think Tampa Bay gets it. And I think, I'll even say this now. I think Tampa Bay is good enough to get out of the Eastern Conference this year. I think they could go all the way to the Cup final this year.
Yeah, you won't find pushback from me on that take, but they're also good enough to lose in the first round. Because until you take the Stanley Cup away from the Panthers, they're the champs. And they've had kind of a dreadful last month, I'll call it. It felt like not a lot of life to their game. They were somewhere around 500. They had crazy amounts of injuries, guys in and out. It just felt like they were not clicking on any level. Again, some of it is beyond anyone's control. It's just you're missing your top players or you're worrying about the playoffs. Like I get how they got there. What I don't know, and what you can't really know, is can they flip that switch? Can they get it back together? Will maybe this matchup, it might pull it out of them, honestly, because it's going to get their attention, right? This series is full of gamers. Which is one of John Cooper's favorite lines. If John Cooper calls someone on his team a gamer, that's like the guy getting A+ on his report card at the end of the semester. Like that's the ultimate compliment from the coach. But what I think of is just players that even if they're not at whatever percent, I mean, so many of these guys have been key members of teams that have gone on multiple long runs. I think of the Braden Points, Anthony Cirelli's, even like Brandon Hagel's newer on the Tampa side, but he just fits in. Like it feels like he was meant to be a Tampa Bay Lightning. I feel like he fits in. So we're a group. Obviously, at the Florida side, we know pretty well that you're going to have the Kachucks and Bennett. You got the X factor more just because I have no idea if it's going to be X good, X bad, X what. But you got Brad Marchand on the other side. I don't know what version of him will show up in this series, but you can be. He's Brady Tkachuk a decade on. He's going to want to be at least distracting the other team if he isn't beating them with his hands and scoring a goal or something along the way. I think you're right. There's probably a lot of headline series right now, and so it might not be getting the headlines, but it could end up being the most entertaining. Like I think it's going to be, and I don't use this word lightly, just I want to say a war, but just like an absolute drag them out. Probably some scrums, potentially like a scene at one point at the end of a game where there's like 10 players on the ice with gloves and sticks everywhere, and if not outright fights, just like scrums. And I think that there's so many players that are getting towards the end of their careers too. A lot of the guys I mentioned, I'm not saying they're retiring next week, but they know they only get so many chances, and all of them right now find themselves on a good team. Because as you mentioned, the Lightning probably good enough if their things fall their way, if they get through this round, if they stay healthy, all the qualifiers, good enough to go on a cup run. Well, we know the Panthers are. It doesn't mean they will, but there's no question that they have what it takes. We've seen them do it twice now in the last 2 years. So, there's a lot at stake for those sorts of players. And so I think the emotion of this series will be set to about 12 out of 10 the entire way through.
Also, the quotes from Paul Maurice and John Cooper, the best we'll get from any playoff series this spring.
Yeah, that's the all quote series right there. If you're covering that one, it's just like make sure you hit record before they start talking, because they're going to do your job for you most days.
1,000%. Okay, we've gone through all of the Eastern Conference series. Let's get to the West. We can start with Dallas and Colorado. One guy I'm really intrigued about, and you were talking about him earlier this week on TSN, Miro Heiskanen. My understanding he's not. You've said it before. He's not going to be available for round one. How big of a factor is him not being in the lineup for Dallas?
I should amend that slightly. It doesn't look like he's going to be available for round one, and the only reason I think to hedge there is because injury timelines get. Sometimes they get rubbed out or smudged when you get in the playoffs and the stakes go up. So, obviously he's doing everything he can to get back as soon as possible. And if maybe there's a world where he can convince the doctors or get to a spot physically where he's comfortable to play sooner. But the expectation heading in, the realistic expectation is that, they can't count on him 100% being able to play in round one. And so, he had a knee surgery early February. He did resume skating the end of March, but this could be a huge point of, in a series probably where the margins aren't that big, what that looks like. Can he end up surprising? Maybe he's in for game 5, something like that, could make a difference. But also, is he able to contribute at that point? I mean, I'm worried about Brady Tkachuk, who hasn't played in 3 weeks. This guy hasn't played in a couple months. So it's a little different sort of figuration there, but I think that looms large over the series. Obviously, Heiskanen, the top defenseman on Dallas, their ice time leader. They're a guy they've leaned on a lot over the years too. He's got a lot of experience. So when you're going up against McKinnon and Nichushkin, who's had a really probably hasn't got a ton of headlines, but has been really strong here of late. That's going to be a tough spot to be in. And so, basically I would say that series starts with me saying he could play, but I wouldn't count on it. And obviously the Dallas Stars need him because of how impactful he can be.
Colorado would make me nervous if I was a Stars fan. Dallas was my early season pick to win the Cup. I feel very nervous considering what Colorado has. I mean, we've known about Makar and McKinnon for years. Obviously, we know what they're able to do on a night in, night out basis, but just the way that they've been rolling this year, even though they've been locked in that third in the Central, I don't know, just they look like they could go on a run too.
And Dallas has stumbled here of late, right? And it might be one of those things. The stumbling doesn't matter. Florida, for example, before winning the Cup last year, I think they were like 2-7-1 in their last 10 in the regular season. Like sometimes we might put too much stock into the team's exact precise form in the week or 2 or 3 preceding the playoffs. But I mean, Dallas's form has not been good. And so that, I think that adds another little, if not a full seed of doubt, it's just sort of like plants like the idea that, maybe this isn't going to come together. But, let's look at the flip side. They made that big Rantanen trade at the deadline. Why'd they do that? Well, Rantanen has been one of the absolute best performers, not just of this generation, but any generation when you look at his points per game in the playoffs. And there are people out there that say, well, of course he's got that. Look who he was playing with. And so he will have heard that. He's a proud guy. He's not a dummy. You know, I think he's got a lot to prove in this series. It's got to be a little uncomfortable, even still, like even though he's 2 teams on now and just the way this whole season played out. But you know, he could be a difference maker. I mean, when such a big, powerful man and you know, got a great history of scoring goals. And so, you know, I think this is must watch TV. I hope there aren't too many players injured, honestly. You know, we haven't even got to the possibility and the likelihood, it seems, that Gabriel Landeskog's going to, you know, play his first game in almost 3 years in the NHL anyway. He played a couple of games for the Colorado Eagles on a conditioning loan. But, you know, this series literally does have it's box office. It's got everything. And it's certainly got 2 teams that if you said to me one of them wins the Stanley Cup in June, I would say, yeah, that makes some sense. That doesn't sound crazy. But unfortunately for them, they've got to go through each other first, and probably doesn't get any easier once one of them gets to round 2 either, because, you know, you got the Jets or Blues on the other end of that.
Speaking of injuries, crossing my fingers for Jason Robertson, who left Wednesday night's game with a lower body injury. Obviously for his sake, you don't want him to be out for the playoffs. For Dallas, they really could use him for that playoff series. You talked about not wanting any more injuries. Them going into a series without Miro Heiskanen and Jason Robertson, there's some trouble. But they have Tyler Seguin coming back.
Yeah, he's back after a long run. December 1st was his last game until the season finale. So, you know, he actually had a really good start to the year. I mean, that's lost to sort of the memories of time. But, you know, he was a point per game for Dallas in the first 19, 20 games of the season. And another veteran player. I mean, look, again, stacked lineups. I mean, Colorado traded for Brock Nelson this year, in addition to, you know, adding Natchez. They rebuilt their goaltending. You know, there's not a lot of holes on either side, frankly. Now the Stars do have the injuries, like Niels Lundqvist is out, obviously, and we talked about Heiskanen. So if Robertson's out, I mean, maybe there ends up being, this wasn't a full fight on fight, but I mean, for NHL teams, these teams do not have a lot of apparent issues, holes, problems. And I think that's what, I mean, look, I've not liked the divisional playoff format. Now it has gifted us some great series. So you're going to hear less complaining about it this year than normal from me, but this would be an example of a series that probably shouldn't happen in the first round, but we can't control that. And so we just celebrate and watch it.
Can't wait to watch it when obviously we're not watching Toronto, Ottawa. Okay. Edmonton, LA. This is the year the Kings do it. This is LA versus Edmonton, round 4. The Oilers had home ice advantage the first 3 times. LA will get home ice advantage for the first time. They've been one of the better, if not the best, team at home this year. I know they are in the Western Conference. Quentin Byfield, I've liked his development throughout the year too, but obviously guys up and down their lineup as well with what they've been able to do. I like the Kings against the Edmonton Oilers this year. I don't know if that's controversial to say. I just think they might have enough to do it to upend an Oilers team that obviously has had to deal with whatever injuries they have. But I also get betting against Connor McDavid is pretty stupid. But I think this is the year I'll be stupid. I'm willing to take whatever L I get if I'm wrong, but I just like the Kings game this year.
Well, the 100%ers that are deep enough in this episode and still listening closely will note that I'm taking the Oilers in this one. So Julian's got the Kings. I've got the Oilers. I was in the camp you're in because I don't think it's a controversial take, frankly. I mean, LA this season was one of the best, if not the best, defensive teams in the league. They created a great environment for Darcy Kemper to thrive, and he's been solid since coming over in that offseason trade. As you mentioned, Quentin Byfield's putting up the kind of numbers that don't win him a Selke trophy yet, but you start to see, hey, this is someone who's going to get that kind of love if his career keeps blossoming in the way it is. I don't have a lot of negatives to say about LA. What they don't have, of course, and what nobody has, is Connor McDavid. And I'm buying into narrative here, but I loved Connor's quotes this week when he was pretty defiant and talking about like it's too soon to say we're banged up. Like that's like, I love him pushing back that way because I do think one part of the playoffs that is hard to measure, but if you've been around it or you've watched, one thing I think belief matters. And that Oilers team, even if it's a little against the odds at this point, I mean, losing Ekholm's going to hurt. Their goaltending has not been that good. I mean, frankly, Calvin Pickard has been their better goalie. I don't think they're going to go with Pickard in the playoffs. I mean, I don't even know what I would do if that was my decision, frankly, because I think Stuart Skinner is probably the safer way to go. But I mean, it's not been a good year defensively or in net for the Oilers. Obviously, both things are tied together. You lose your best defensive player. Like, all those things are stacked up against you. If they believe they're going to go on a run again, they have the guys. They have the guys to win a game 6-5. Now, that's not the way LA plays. That's certainly not the way LA will ever try to play. But if a game goes in that direction, they're not going to be out of it, provided that McDavid and Draisaitl are both healthy, which is a little bit of a question mark. I mean, that's what McDavid was pushing against publicly. But I mean, the facts are the facts. Draisaitl has missed a whack of games here. McDavid missed some of his own. He came back and had like 9 assists in 3 games. So maybe that's all the statement we need on his health. But I don't know. I sort of feel like it's like Battle of Ontario vibes from way back in the day, where I just feel like no matter the circumstances, Edmonton's just going to find a way, like that they've maybe planted their own seed of doubt. And so I like that we have the odd series, Julian, where you and I are, we're not betting anything or anything like that, but it's nice to have a true difference of opinion that's not manufactured or anything, that we see it, opposite ways.
I'm kind of glad we're not betting anything. I saw someone put in a question for the next Ask CJ, which you can start getting your questions in now, by the way, asking if we were going to do a friendly wager for the Battle of Ontario. Like, I'm good, bro.
No,
I'm good. I don't need to do it.
We're not betting on that series because we have to cover it, and it gets weird.
Yeah.
If we were going to do one Edmonton, LA, we could put a sandwich on or something, but whatever. But
like dinner or something. Like
exactly.
Like we buy each other dinner or something. I don't know.
Yeah, but my point is we'll have it a series that's physically a long way from us, not something that we're professionally involved with, and that's what it is. So anyway, let's go Oilers. It's not looking good heading into this series, but it's hard to ignore what McDavid and Draisaitl done over multiple playoffs. I think they're going to find their way through at least round 1.
By the way, I did not intend on us giving predictions on each series. I did openly say I wasn't trying to do it, and now it's turned to a situation where we're giving predictions on teams we might think will win. We conveniently did not provide a prediction for the Battle of Ontario. Do you want maybe after we go through all the series, do you still want to give some predictions? How do you feel about that?
No.
You're I'm cool with that. How about Minnesota and Vegas? I mean, we're probably not going to see Marc-Andre Fleury play in the series, but I do like the fact that these two teams, these two franchises that have meant as much to him, those two teams get to go against each other. Vegas is also a team I look at coming out of that Western Conference and just being powerful. I mean, they rested a couple guys the other night, but a team where they've had the playoff experience, they have the talent up and down the lineup, and guys like Jack Eichel and Shea Theodore and Noah Hannafin and everyone else up and down the lineup. Like, that's such a super good team. Mark Stone, obviously. I see them dominating the Wild. Honestly, I know the Wild will have some of their big stars back, but I like the Vegas Golden Knights in this one.
Yeah, I'm with you on this one. I mean, it actually reminds me a little bit of how I feel about Carolina and New Jersey. I just have a difficult time even talking myself into Minnesota making this like truly exciting, like getting it to 7 games or something. I mean, everything is possible. It's hockey. It's what happens. But when I look at it, I think this should be one of, along with that other series, the more lopsided ones where I am quite confident that, Vegas should be a heavy favorite in this. Coming off another division win, maybe haven't generated as much attention this year, but, Jack Eichel's had really strong season on both sides of the puck. Their blue line does not have holes. The goaltending has withstood pressure in the past. Thomas Hertl is fully healthy this season, right? He was back in their lineup after the deadline deal last year, but he was not really a factor for them in the playoffs. But, another year on, he's in the mix here. I'm with you. I think the Vegas, they just come at you with 4 lines, and I think they're going to be too much for the Wild to handle in this series. So, you know, and in a way, I hope I'm wrong. I kind of hope every series goes 7 games and they're all nail biters and everybody's losing their minds and the NHL's back in the headlines every night for all the right reasons. You know, the way we've had it at times this season with some other events and the like. But I have a feeling this could be a quick, 4 or 5 and out for Vegas.
You know what? I'll peel back a little bit. I still think Vegas wins that series, but I also need to give some credit to the Wild that they know how to play a good defensive tight style. I remember a game earlier this year where actually the Sens actually dominated the Wild, but leading up to it, the Wild had shown that they were able to rack up a bunch of wins together and they were able to play solidly defensively, particularly on the road. It was actually a pretty impressive win for Ottawa, but I don't know. I still think Vegas wins that series. Maybe not in like a 4-5 situation. Maybe it goes to 6. For me, it's just, yeah, sure, the Minnesota Wild can defend, but so can the Vegas Golden Knights. They can beat you almost any way possible in the playoffs. So I have to give them that edge.
Yeah, I think they're going to really wear them down. It's just, I think that it's going to be too much. Like you're going to be looking for almost like the moment that you can take a breath, and then the next line comes out, and the next line, and the next line. And I just don't see a neutralizing fact there for Minnesota. But we'll have to see how it goes. That's just kind of I haven't dug much deeper into it. But my higher level impression is this will be a rather one-sided best of 7.
Final series: Winnipeg, St. Louis. You have the Winnipeg Jets, the best team in the NHL this year. Connor Hellebuyck, he looks like the favorite for the Hart Trophy, which after a spectacular season that he's had, I think he might be the most deserving of that honor. And then you have the St. Louis Blues, who have been the hottest team over the last month. They'd won 12 in a row to put themselves in the spot that they're in. Who do you think? I mean, you don't have to give a prediction if you don't want to. But how do you see this series shaking out?
Well, the Blues have Joe Boo as well. I don't know if you've seen this, but it's a bit of a clapback for anyone that's old enough. But the movie Major League, at the time, the Cleveland baseball team got rallying around the sort of voodoo doll character, and somehow the Blues have had the same thing. And so, anyway, they've got a little extra luck on their side, is all I'm getting at. A little superstition. I'm fascinated to see Connor Hellebuyck in this series. His numbers were not good last year in the playoffs. I know he said that he actually thinks from a process standpoint, it wasn't as bad as those numbers might look if you just call up his Hockey DB page or what have you. But, I think after the season he's had, the statement he's made, he's 100%. I mean, we don't vote on this, but take it to the bank that he's going to win another Vezina after this season. As you mentioned, some other hardware. He's been such a huge part of the Jets' success. I think the Jets as a team, put them in a good spot too. I think defensively they've made some strides from some of the previous years. So, the Jets have earned the favorite label. Like they've earned the home ice advantage. St. Louis did drop a couple games down the stretch, so they're maybe not on quite the heater they were. But I mean, it's you got the battle of the Shen brothers in this series. It's just yet another series that I think has a lot of interesting wrinkles to it. I mean, that's a common theme through a lot of these matchups, the way it's played out. If I'm picking, I still think the Jets find their way through it. But they would have rather probably got Minnesota as an opponent, but they didn't get to choose that. And so the chips fell where they did. And I don't think the Blues will be an easy out by any stretch, especially because they're feeling it. But Winnipeg was top of the league from start to finish, pretty much. I mean, they were consistently a high end team, produced a lot of offense. I mean, being down Nikolai Ehlers will hurt. I mean, we should mention that when we're talking about injuries, and it looks possible that he could be gone for all the first round too. At this point, they're calling him week to week, and problem with a week in the playoffs is that's 3 or 4 games. So If you miss the 1 week and then the second week and week to week, you miss the round, generally speaking. So that's going to dent Winnipeg somewhat, but I just think the Jets pretty stout team. And I think Hellebuyck has a little something to prove, whether he acknowledges or not. There were some questions about his play last year when it got to the postseason, and I don't see that being a reoccurring theme. But that's kind of where I think that will be a difference maker for them, the way it has been so often this season.
Okay, I think we've gone through every single series in the opening round of the playoffs. So many good matchups. So many good games. You see an upset in St.
Louis, Winnipeg, or what?
I'm picking Winnipeg to win. That being said, it is incredibly difficult to go wire to wire as the best team throughout this season, throughout any season. So if Winnipeg ends up being that team that goes on a run, say they get out of the Western Conference and they end up being that Stanley Cup final representative, that's an incredible, impressive season, especially what we've seen over the last few years with teams dominating in the regular season and not getting it done when it really matters in the playoffs. I give Winnipeg all the credit in the world, but they have to find a way to do it for 4 rounds. But I do give them this first round over St. Louis. But it would be really cool to see St. Louis, with the changes they made partway through the year, them going on a heater near the end of this season, if they found a way to upend the Winnipeg Jets. That is an upset worth talking about.
Yeah. It could happen though. Like, I think it'll be a close series. So I'm certainly not like standing in one camp saying like, no, you're wrong or anything like that. But I'm also leaning Winnipeg, but only by the sort of smaller margins. I think it'll be a 6-7 game type series, and it'll be a tough one.
That's another dark horse-esque series in terms of our attention. Love it. Love the first round matchups.
The whiteout, man. The whiteout in Winnipeg is something. It's
going to be fun over there.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great to be in the building, but it also jumps through the screen if you're just watching it on TV.
Absolutely. Do you have a stick tap before we go?
Yeah, we'd be remiss if we didn't look back a little bit to the week that was, and the announcement from Logan Couture that he's going to be unable to continue with his hockey career. And I thought I had a chance to watch the press conference he had in San Jose, and I thought Logan was really, showed a lot of gratitude, I would say, in the stories he was telling and the words he was using. He actually shared a lot of anecdotes of things, some of the older Sharks players told him when he came into the league, and he was actually imparting during his press conference because he had all of the current team there. He was imparting a lot of that wisdom on the young guys, obviously Macklin Celebrini, Will Smith, right down the line, young roster in San Jose nowadays. And so I thought, well, it's unfortunate circumstances. It's Logan's health that's limited to in just 6 games last season, didn't play at all this year. His condition essentially makes it so that when you try to ramp up your return, you can do only so far, and then you almost go back to zero. Like, you can never get to the point because of pain, because of fatigue. I actually talked to a few other NHL players after Logan's thing that I didn't realize. One guy in particular reached out to me. I don't want to share who it is because it was a private conversation, but said that had forced him to retire, and he was telling me about some of like what it was like, and it just sounds like an awful way to. I mean, there's no good way to go out for your career when it's your health. But, the good news is Logan, it seemed like he's in a good spot with it. I think it's been very difficult a couple of years for him, but, maybe it's a bit of a weight off for him to come out and formally just say out loud, look, I'm not trying to come back anymore. I'm going to be unable to continue. And, Mike Greer did mention at the press conference, Julian, that he said, whenever you're ready, there's a job for you with the Sharks. So, doesn't sound like that's going to happen right away here. I think Logan wants to spend some time with his young family. But he was always a very sharp guy. And so it will not surprise me if he has a career in hockey, long beyond his playing days once he decides what he wants to do. The other thing I should mention, he was an all-time gamer. When we were talking about gamers earlier, like he got better when the playoffs came around. He scored so many big goals in San Jose. Led the playoffs in goal scoring and in points at multiple years in the postseason. And when they played a montage where they had a lot of former teammates and stuff, just giving him well wishes, so many of those guys mentioned that they admired about him that somehow he got to like another level when it was the biggest pressure and the biggest spotlight. And so, I thought that was sort of fitting. Here we are on the eve of the playoffs. We're going to celebrate, whichever player or players fit that role today in today's game. But, not that long ago, that was Logan Couture. And unfortunately, his career ends a little prematurely here. But, I did want to just stick tap him for the words he shared on his way out.
That's cool. 101 career playoff points in 116 career playoff games for Logan Couture. Absolute gamer. I think gamer is the right word to describe how Logan Couture went about the Stanley Cup playoffs. Absolutely. For a player of his quality. My stick tap will go to the Columbus Blue Jackets. I know we're not going to see them in the playoffs, but it was really cool to see their season play out the way that it did. We know about the tragedy they endured with the unfortunate passing of Johnny Gaudreau in the offseason. But the fact that they played well above expectations, guys like Sean Monahan having career resurgences, it was really fun to watch. And pretty much down to the very end, they gave themselves a chance. If the Montreal Canadiens didn't get the job done against the Carolina Hurricanes, all eyes would be on the Islanders and the Blue Jackets Thursday night. And I got to say, there are a lot of fans who wanted to see the Columbus Blue Jackets make it. When I was at the Canadian Tire Center on Tuesday watching Ottawa and Chicago, they were showing scores, some out of town scores, and they were showing Columbus doing the beatdown on Philadelphia, and fans were roaring and cheering. I think if Columbus made it to the playoffs, they would have been a lot of fans like second team. There would have been a lot of bandwagon hopping on just for what they've endured to this point in their season. And it would have been a really cool story for them to make it. But I still think in spite of what they went through, in spite of them missing the playoffs, this is still, I think, a successful season in their eyes. Plus, Zach Werenski could emerge from this as a Norris candidate when it's all said and done, considering what he's been able to do on the ice as well.
Well said. And honestly, what's cool for them is two things. The fact it went down to the second last day is insane. Like, you could have told somebody that even in December, let alone on October 5th, no one would have believed you. Maybe in Columbus they would have, but I mean externally. And the second part is, I think this is sustainable. Like, I don't think this isn't just an underdog story. I mean, this season itself was an underdog story. But I think the Blue Jackets actually have a lot of good things going on there. And the success of their team was driven by some younger guys that I think will continue to grow into roles and be more impactful. And I think that's going to be a good team. And so they took a bigger step this season than I would have forecasted. But when they come back next year, they're going to have the confidence and the belief to go with the skill they have in the room to be a playoff team next year. So, it's not all a sad story, right? I think for them, there is a lot of redeeming qualities to this year. And, just getting through it and doing their jobs for the first part must have been difficult, but they came together and they did something special. And I think the best is yet to come for that core of that group.
I agree. And that's going to do it for today's edition of the CJ Show. Get your questions in for the next Ask CJ. We'll get to your questions on Monday. Subscribe to the podcast. Leave a nice rating for us. It would just be nice if you just left a nice rating. We like those. That'll do it for today's show. We'll talk to you guys
Julian,
next week.
Playoffs?
You kidding me? Playoffs?
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.